we should all visit, is the resting place of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, Masjidul Khalil. And so I just wanted to bring this up. If we could bring it up, Sajjad, on screen for those of us who've been there and seen. Yeah, there's Masjid Ibrahim in Hebron. And it's a very unique place in that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam is buried there. Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam is buried there. And Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is buried there as well. And Palestine, Palestine, Sham in general, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, this area, it's the land of the prophets. And so you have a particular place and a space in which those prophets are buried. And of course, we know that Sayyidina Musa alayhi salamullah is buried in this region as well. And so it's a special region, it's a special place, and it's a Mubarak place. And so when I opened the news this week, there's some unfortunate news that we saw about what's happening in the West Bank, not just in Gaza alone. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in Gaza and we're seeing what's happening in Lebanon. But our hearts also break when we see what's happening in the West Bank. There was an incident that we're going to show right now in which a group of Israeli settlers with the Israeli army stormed the maqam, the resting place of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. Can we bring that up on screen, Sajjad, please? Yeah. We see, religion. Settlers, we could take it off screen, and they're protected by the Israeli army just because they can, just to show the local Palestinian Muslim population that we can do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it. And it actually reminded me of a video I saw. Actually, it's an older video, but I want to share it with you in depth. There's a certain period in time in which the masjid and the resting place of the prophets is open for the settlers to come in and pray. So I want to show in this video what happens there. And you see, if you see those sort of pyramid-like structures there, that's where the prophets are buried, under that area. Now you can imagine, you're entering into a space and place in which prophets are buried. And this is where you're going to see a divide between how the Muslim community interacts with its prophets and how other communities interact with their prophets. To us, prophets were sent to tell us and guide us to the divine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran al-Kareem, for example, that whoever obeys the messenger of God, Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, has obeyed Allah. So in his presence, we have to have humility. In his presence, alayhi salatu wassalam, we have to be in awe. We have to have reverence. Now, that's not just in the presence of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. It's in the presence of all prophets. And it's not just in the presence of prophets, it's even in the presence of saintly characters of our Islamic tradition, alive or buried, alive or dead. We still enter upon them in a sense of reverence and awe and humility. So if you were to go to Al-Madina al-Munawwara and you were to go to visit the Messenger of God, Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, you have to summon within your heart that awe and humility and reverence of him as you're entering Bab as-Salam to give him salam. We don't act like other people act. Everyone there, they're pulling out their phones and they're calling their friends and they're speaking loudly. No. We don't do any of that. We enter with humble hearts. We enter with reverent hearts. We enter with etiquette as if we're entering upon him, alayhi salatu wassalam, alive. And we do this when we visit any other prophet because they were sent on a humanistic level to represent the divine. That's how we enter into these spaces. So I want to share how other traditions enter into these spaces. If we could play this. And this is in the Muslim. You get a feel of the difference of the tradition, of the difference level of respect and ihtiram and deep rooted mercy based love that we have for these individuals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to guide us to Him. That's not how we enter. That's not our way. We enter upon them just like we'd enter upon them when they were alive. And we have to dispel this notion that when someone dies, that their existence is over. No, death is just an entry point to a different level of existence. You go through the door of death, and now your physical body, you're no longer in charge of, but your spirit, your soul, your ruh has now entered into a realm where it's unfettered. It's in existence. It's alive in a different way of life, in a completely different style. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran al-Kareem, for example, about those who've died in the way of Allah. Don't say about them amwat. Don't even say that they're dead. بل أحياء عند ربهم. Verily, they're alive with their Lord, given their rizq, being given their sustenance. So we can't look at death as an entry point into non-existence. This is not the Islamic tradition. This is not our way. And I want to share with you a very beautiful narration, a story that happened during the time of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, illustrating this when it comes to non-believers, let alone to prophets, and let alone to the believing community. And the story, this hadith is narrated by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu arda, and it's a beautiful story that also shares with us the miracles of the miracle of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. And Sayyidina Anas says, we were with Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu arda between Mecca and Medina when he started to tell us about the people of Badr. And he said that the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam showed us the day before the battle where the disbelievers would fall, where they would die. You can imagine the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam was with Sayyidina Umar and the Sahaba. And there are about 300 and so individuals up against 1,000. And they get to Badr one day before the disbelievers. And the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam is pointing to exact spots where disbelievers will fall and will die. Sayyidina Jibreel had informed him of this. Now, if you're the companions hearing this, you're thinking to yourself, we are afraid about this army that's going to meet us and fight us. We have one horse or a few horses, and you're telling us that the leaders of Quraysh are going to die in this spot, and the Messenger of God, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, confirmed that. And then Sayyidina Umar goes on to say, by the one who sent him with the truth, they did not miss those places. After the battle was over, they went and they saw the exact place that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam had mentioned, that all of those disbelievers that he mentioned by name fell and died. And they're all gathered and they were thrown into a well. And Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam starts to address them. The Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi starts to speak to the dead. And he calls out, "Oh, so-and-so, son of so-and-so. Oh, so-and-so, son of so-and-so. Have you found what your Lord promised you to be true? Or I have found what Allah has promised me to be true." Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam is speaking to Abu Jahl. He's speaking to all these individuals. He said, have you found it to be true? You're now living in that new existence. You're dead, but now you're in a different type of life. Have you found everything that I told you is true? Now, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu ardah is surprised. The Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, in his understanding, is speaking to the dead. And he says, "Oh, Messenger of God, are you speaking to bodies in which there are no souls?" And the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, he says, "You don't hear what I say any better than they do." SubhanAllah. Meaning that you're right next to me, ya Umar, and you hear what I say, they hear me just like you hear me. And in one narration, the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama says about them, except that they can't respond. They are unable to respond. So we can't see death as an entry point into non-existence. And the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, he taught us a further lesson in this point. And Sajjad, if we can bring this out now when it comes to the prophets. Now, we just discussed what it was like for the non-believers. We're saying someone who lived a life diametrically opposed to the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, in the afterlife still have the ability to hear, but they don't have the ability to respond. Now, the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi is now speaking about the prophets in this narration, and it's a longer narration. Let me just bring it up. Actually, it's a shorter narration. On Abi Darda, that's the one that we have there on screen, right, Sajjad? Where the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama is informing his community, is informing you and I to send so many blessings and prayers upon him, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. And he says, the angels are present on it, and no one will invoke a blessing on me without having his blessing being submitted to me until he stops. And then he said that he was asked whether that applied also after his death. And the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi has said, God has prohibited the earth from consuming the body of the Prophet. The Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama is alive in his resting place. That even the bodies of the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are preserved in their resting places, as if the moment they were walking on earth, in the most perfected and in the most beautiful of forms. So when we go and we enter upon the righteous, and we go and we enter upon the prophets, we need to know that they are preserved in a most perfected form, and they hear us, and they can even respond and do respond to us. And I want to share with us some of the sayings of the great saintly scholars of our tradition, and some of the scholastic scholars of our tradition about this reality. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, radiallahu anhu wa ardah, his companions, they said that من جملة اعتقاد أحمد بن حنبل أنه كان يقول إن الأنبياء أحياء في قبورهم يصلون. This is Imam Ahmad. He says the prophets are alive in their graves praying. It's not that they're just alive. They're still in a state of ibadah, of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're still in a state of at-taqarrub, drawing even closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where is this? In their qubur, in their grave. So those graves that you saw, those qubur of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam in Hebron, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, Sayyidina Ishaq alayhi salam, what are the prophets doing there? They're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why when we enter upon them, we enter with reverent awe, with reverent love, not singing and dancing and taking photos and speaking to each other in loud voices. We're in the presence of the Anbiya, prophets of Allah subhanahu. But it doesn't stop there. Ibn Taymiyyah, who's known by many as Sheikh al-Islam, right? The Sheikh of Islam. What does he say? You have it there in the الأنبياء أحياء في قبورهم وقد يصلون كما رأى محمد موسى صلوات الله وسلامه عليهم وعلى سائر الأنبياء في قبورهم في قبره ليلة الإسراء. Ibn Taymiyyah says, what does he say? He says the prophets are alive in their graves. That means when you go visit Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama in Medina al-Munawwara, and if Ibn Taymiyyah is the scholar that you love to attach yourself to, then you need to know that your sheikh, your teacher, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, says right here that the Prophet, Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salatu is alive in his grave. So when we go by him, alayhi salatu we stand with a reverent awe like we would if we saw him in the moments of him being physically with us. And just he goes on to say, and they may pray as Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam saw Moses in his grave praying on the night of the Isra. Because Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, when he was taken on the night journey from Mecca al-Mukarramah to Jerusalem, he passed by the resting place of Moses and he said, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, I saw him physically praying. This is not a spiritual insight, meaning that it wasn't in the realm of the unseen that he saw him. It was on earth. The Prophet ﷺ saw him physically praying in his grave. And this is the saying of who? Ibn Taymiyyah. And many of the ulama, Imam al-Sakhawi, he says, we believe and affirm that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama is alive in his grave and provided sustenance, and that his noble body is not consumed by the earth, and there is consensus on this. That Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama is alive in his grave, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He hears us when we give him salam. He sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam responds to us when we give him salam. You send your prayers of peace upon him. He sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam says, oh so-and-so, oh Ahmed, son of so-and-so, oh Fatima, oh Michael, oh Steve, oh whoever you are. Wa alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, so when you go visit the Prophet, don't do a drive-by ziyarah. You know those have you seen the drive-by ziyarah sajjad? Now, listen to what the authorities tell you. Don't try to force it to Allah. No, just what Allah gives you is ata from Allah. If you're in Medina al-Munawwara, don't get into any arguments with any of the guards. They're doing their job. You see how many people are visiting Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. But don't do what I call a drive-by ziyarah, a drive-by visitation, where you just go in there, assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, and you go running away. Don't be like that. Don't be like that. Be in reverent awe. Turn towards the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. He's alive. We've established that clearly through the hadith text and through the saying of these great scholars. And he's aware of you and he's seeing you, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. He's going to respond to you. If you saw him physically, would you just say, Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah, and walk? No, of course not. We'd be in awe. We'd be in awe. And so stand in awe of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatu rabbina alaykum. Assalamu alayka ya Sayyidi ya Rasulullah. Peace be upon you, O Messenger of God. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. And may Allah reward you abundantly for guiding me to truth and guiding me to him and showing me light through your teachings and through your being and through everything that you did. And then you take a step and you do the same to Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And then you take a step. And then you do the same to Sayyidina Umar. And then there are people, because they have such a high reverence and love of the Prophet ﷺ, and you've probably seen it in Medina al-Munawwara that they don't even want to give their back to the Prophet ﷺ. They keep walking with their heads low and their hands on their heart, and they're walking out of just reverent love and awe of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Why? Because he's alive in his grave, and he's responding to us by name. And this is what the scholarship has taught us. And so we don't enter into sanctified places and spaces with, the attitude of individuals that just want to go party. No, we go there with reverence, seeking gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because where else are we going to get gifts better and greater than the gifts that are given in the presence of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. And I want to share with everyone this amazing story, actually. Al-Hafidh ibn Kathir, he narrates this in his tafsir, tafsir work that's known and it's loved and it's read very frequently by many of us, myself included. And he tells a story in his tafsir in relation to ayah. It's ayah number 64 in the 4th chapter of the Quran, Surah An-Nisa. And the ayah goes like this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran al-Kareem, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. And had they, when they were unjust to themselves, come to you and asked for forgiveness of God, and the Messenger sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam also asked forgiveness for them, they would have found God oft returning to mercy and forgiving them. That if you and I make a mistake and we go to the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, and we ask Allah to forgive us, and then we ask the Messenger to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive us. Now, Ibn Kathir narrates a story of a man by the name of Al-Utbi. Al-Utbi was a scholar of our deen, and he says that he himself was sitting in the masjid, the mosque of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And he said a desert Bedouin comes in to pay his respect to the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And he stands in reverent awe, facing the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, giving him salam, and then he recites this very verse. And then he says, O Messenger of God, come to you, and I've asked Allah to forgive me, and I'm asking you to ask Allah to forgive me. And then the Bedouin goes away. The Utbi says, I fell asleep at that moment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he wants to give gifts to people that are sincerely looking for him, he causes things to happen around them. Al-Utbi is a scholar. He says, I fell asleep. And I saw in my dream the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And he says to me, O Utbi, go catch up with that Bedouin. Wake up. Go find that Bedouin and give him glad tidings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven him. And Al-Utbi, of course, he wakes up and he runs and and so that Bedouin, coming into the presence of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam was a source of mercy for that Bedouin, and it was a source of a big treasure for Utbi. Because Al-Utbi got to see the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam in that dream. And so he comes and he asks Allah to forgive him, and he asks the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi to ask Allah to forgive him. And Al-Hafidh ibn Kathir is narrating that Utbi sees this dream, and the Prophet ﷺ goes, tell him that Allah has forgiven. So not only is he giving salam to the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, He's interacting with the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama in his grave as you and I would interact with each other when we are in the physical realm with each other. Why? The prophets are alive in their graves praying. They are in a different state of being. And so if we go and we don't come in with that reverent awe, and if we just go in there with a drive-by visitation of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama, first of all, we're disrespecting the maqam, the station of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama. And number two, we are missing out on so much good and so much khair that can be brought into our lives. So we have to really reorient ourselves to realize the beauty of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in this tradition by allowing us to go visit Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.